Okay, I did turn on the live stream, so we are live now. But we can wait, obviously, a few minutes before we. Let's give it just a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with the public meeting. My name is Jesse Schuler. I'm the Director of Planning for the town of Somerville, and this is our first public meeting for our urban forest master plan draft. And I am now going to turn it over to the Davie Resource Group.
Thank you. My name is Sandra Albro. I'm with Davie Resource Group. I'm an urban forestry consultant, and I've been working with the town of Somerville on your urban forest master plan now for several months. I'm joined by Joe Joyner, also with Davie Resource Group. And today we'll be talking about the urban forest master plan, which will be published later this summer. We'll brief you on the findings of the plan and the process that led into the creation of recommendations for how to advance urban forestry in the town of Somerville. Okay, so we'll start. First of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We'll give you a bit of background on the planning process and then review the urban forest master plan itself. What were the findings of the urban tree canopy assessment, the community outreach, and the research that went into developing the recommendations for the plan. At the end of this webinar, there will be a chance for you to ask questions and provide your feedback. We'd love to hear from you about it. The full plan will be available for your review next week. The town of Somerville will share that out. We encourage you to read the plan, provide your feedback, and then we're hoping for town council to review, vote on, and adopt the plan, hopefully in July. I want to start by recognizing the project team that has been working on this now since last fall. We've been very fortunate to work with great staff at the town of Somerville, led by Jesse Schuler and Amy Evans. We've also worked with Tim Matchell, Nick Wilson, Rebecca Zimmerman, Remy Clark, Bryce Motes, and Bill Salisbury. On this Davie Resource Group side, I'm joined here today by Joe Joyner, Senior Associate Consultant, and we've been working with Will Ayersman, Shelby Huth, and Jessica Atsis at Davie. Just a little bit about Davie. We're an industry leader in providing professional urban forestry services across the United States. We are the consultant arm of the Davie Tree Expert Company, which is a national company that was founded 140 years ago around tree care. We've now worked as an organization on 400 plus urban community forest plans and more than 100 urban tree canopy assessments. Each year we inventory 1 million trees. We also manage software related to inventory management of trees for communities. And we partner with the USDA Forest Service on the iTree Tools software suite, which is freely available on the web. If you have any questions about the benefits that trees provide, this suite of tools is available for download and use. So all of this is just to summarize that, we bring a lot of experience to your urban forest master plan. And it's been a lot of fun to learn from Somerville and the lessons that we've learned in Somerville. Of course, will also go into the processes that we have with other communities across the country. So as I mentioned, we'll give you an overview of the plan. I've provided some high-level detail here, but there's a lot more detail in the plan itself, so I encourage you to look at that. There will be an opportunity for your input, and then we're hoping for adoption of the plan. And that's really when the big process kicks off. So although we've been working on the plan for months, implementation of the plan will take you into the next 1 to 2 decades. So this is really the beginning of what we foresee to be a long and worthwhile process to increase the level of care for trees throughout Somerville. The structure of this presentation models the plan so that hopefully after seeing this webinar, you'll feel comfortable jumping into the plan and being somewhat familiar with how it's structured. Firstly, what is an urban forest master plan? As I mentioned, it's a plan to grow and manage Somerville's trees over the next 10 to 20 years. It provides information about where you have tree canopy cover, where you don't, information from the community and stakeholders that inform recommendations for how you can advance urban forestry, and then some resources to get you started on that. The plan was collaboratively developed by experts in urban forestry, as well as the town government and residents of Somerville. And we hope that it reflects a shared vision from amongst all of the different stakeholder groups for the vision of the urban forest in Somerville, And we hope too that it inspires stakeholders to care for trees, to plant additional trees, and to support the protection of trees across town. A bit about the urban forestry master plan planning process. This is an adaptive management process that starts with 4 questions that feed back into an iterative loop. So the first question is, what do we have? That encompasses the urban tree canopy analysis of, again, where you have tree cover and where you don't in Somerville. We also researched your existing plans and programs. We read your ordinances and conducted a lot of analysis. That feeds into the next question of what do we want? This is where the feedback from you through the community survey back in January, through the stakeholder focus groups and through the planning team engagement over several months really help us define what the town of Somerville wants from its trees. And that feeds into the question of how do we get there? So once we take your goals, what recommendations and strategies can help support achievement of those goals? So we've synthesized all of the research and engagement into a series of recommendations that can help you achieve those goals. And then the last process or question really starts after this plan is finished, but that's how are we doing? The plan provides some recommendations for how you can measure progress, but really in the future, it'll again be this iterative process of measuring your progress and then feeding back into this loop again of asking, how has that changed where canopy cover is and what we have in Somerville? And then how does that affect what we want and new strategies and goals? I just want to take a moment to talk about the benefits of trees because these benefits really underlie the entire reason why we care about undertaking such a lengthy process of urban forestry planning. And these benefits of trees are really, wide-reaching. I've just picked out a few here that are particularly important for Somerville. I see a couple of these got cut off a little bit, so I'll be sure to read them. First of all, trees reduce urban heat island effect. So urban heat island is the ability for impervious surfaces such as roads, sidewalks, and buildings to hold and trap heat and raise the overall temperatures of town 2 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit higher than adjacent natural areas. So these peak summer, higher peak summer temperatures have a lot of health impacts, especially on seniors and children, people who are very vulnerable to heat stress. And so by shading and cooling the air, trees can help prevent about 1,200 heat-related deaths each year in the US. And this becomes increasingly important as the town of Somerville grows and gets more impervious surface. Trees also clean the air by removing pollutants and particulates that can help prevent incidents of asthma exacerbation. So across the US, trees help prevent 430,000 incidents of asthma each year. Trees absorb stormwater runoff, which is incredibly important in the low country. They can reduce runoff and pollutants by 20 to 60%. Trees also help save us energy. So if you place a tree on the southern exposure of your house, that can reduce your energy costs each year by up to $250 in less time that you're running your air conditioner and less time that you're running the heater in the winter. Trees enhance quality of life and improve well-being. There's a lot of research that has linked trees and the natural beauty that they provide to reductions in stress. Also, by making the environment more tolerable for us in the summer and during extreme weather, trees also have a lot of health benefits that way. So these reductions in stress and improvements to our environment have been linked to all sorts of benefits, such as reducing crime, helping student achievement, being more physically active, and just mentally feeling much better. So there are wide-ranging number of benefits that trees provide. These are just some of the high-level ones. And these benefits really inform why we care enough to create a plan. So the timing of the Urban Forest Master Plan in Somerville comes at an interesting time in the town's history where there's a lot of growth and a lot of change. And we're looking at how we can protect trees and increase tree cover at this time of change. So there's environmental change happening. By the end of the century, Somerville is expected to see about 2.5 inches of rain on top of the rain that you currently have. And most of that will occur as single big storm events. So their stormwater absorption from trees is very important. Also by 2044, Somerville is expected to see 30 more days of extreme heat per year. So that's days with maximum temperatures greater than 90 degrees. Again, the cooling effects of trees will be very important as the town of Somerville continues to warm in the summer. And of course, we're seeing introductions of new pests and diseases each day. So these weather patterns affect both residents and visitors in Somerville, as well as the trees themselves and what trees can grow and thrive in Somerville in these conditions. And then there's the town growth and development. Your comprehensive plan showed that we've seen an average of about 1.7% of compound growth each year, and that's projected to continue in Somerville into the foreseeable future. That brings with it all sorts of changes to the landscape, like impervious surface, removing trees, planting trees. So that's how to balance tree protection and growth and development is a theme of the master plan that you'll hear me refer to a few times. Overall, the vision for Somerville's trees that came out during this planning process when we worked with the town, talked to residents and stakeholders, I think there's agreement that the vision is that the purposeful planting, protection, and care of Somerville's trees will distinguish the town as a place of beauty, health, and vitality for residents and visitors. And now I'll jump into the findings of the urban tree canopy assessment. The latest aerial data from 2019 tell us that the town of Somerville, about 46% of the town area is shaded by trees. So you'll hear me refer to that as tree canopy cover. An additional 25% of the town is impervious surface. So like I said, those roads, sidewalks, buildings. Almost an additional quarter is in lawns, shrubs, other types of low-lying vegetation. And then you have a little bit of bare soil in active developments and agricultural land, and about 2% of open water. And the 46% canopy cover in Somerville in this chart at right compares the town with other towns and cities in your region. And you can see that Somerville compares pretty favorably. You have higher canopy cover than Sumter, Charlotte, and then a little bit lower canopy cover than Charleston, North Augusta, and Savannah. And this was based on the different towns and cities for which we have tree canopy cover information, and you can see the years of those data at the bottom of the chart. When you look at where canopy is distributed, you see quite a bit of variability. So amongst census plot groups, tree cover ranges from 0% to 93%, depending on what part of town you're in. In the plan, we've broken the town of Somerville up into quadrants so that you can see some detail of the town. We discovered that if you just show like a full map of the town, it can be hard to see some of the detail. So you'll see in the plan that most maps are broken up into quadrants of town. And this series of maps shows parcels and how parcels vary in their tree canopy cover from under 20% tree cover in the lightest color green up to over 60% in the darker green. And what we see is that generally in more developed areas of town, so the older parts and also the very new developments, those tend to have the lowest tree canopy cover. And the areas with the highest cover tend to be vacant lands or agricultural lands. And the way that that's changing is that in a 4-year period for which we have tree cover information from 2015 to 2019, we have those 2 points in time where we can start to see how tree cover has changed over time. So in this 5-year period, we saw 11% reduction in tree canopy cover across town on average. In this series of maps, you can see areas of modest growth in green, and then areas of loss of tree canopy in orange and pink. The darkest pink represents more than a 10% loss of tree canopy cover. And then the yellow is from 0 to 5% tree canopy cover. In general, there wasn't any one land use or type of area that experienced loss. We saw loss across town. In this map of the council districts, you can see that every council district lost tree canopy cover. In Council District 5, they tended to have the fewest losses, just 0 to 5% tree cover loss. And then in Council Districts 1, 2, and 3, they saw more than a 10% loss of tree cover. In this chart on the left, we can see the number of parcels that experience different types of canopy change. So we looked at every parcel across town and then lumped them into buckets based on the canopy change that they experienced in this 5-year period. So most parcels, 9,560 parcels, lost between 0.1 and 1 acres of tree cover each in that 5-year period. We saw an additional 5,000 parcels where there wasn't really any significant change, and then about 3,400 parcels where there was a modest gain of 0.1 to 1 acres of tree canopy cover. If we look at that by land use type, we'll just take a minute to walk through this table. On the left, you have the different land use types in Somerville. So residential land, we have commercial, educational, industrial types of land. In the second column, you'll see what their tree cover was in 2019. So again, the town tree cover was 46%, but almost all land uses were below that town average. The vacant land has pretty high tree cover that pulls the average up compared to the rest of the town. Most sectors of town are below 46% tree cover. So if you just look at percent loss, commercial land lost the most percent of tree cover, but that's a fairly small part of town. So that only comprises about 27 acres. If you look at the absolute acreage of tree canopy change, we saw the biggest changes in residential land, which lost 292 acres of tree cover in a 5-year period, and also vacant land that lost 265 acres of tree canopy cover, mostly through development. So those residential losses, those could be any types of losses due to, maybe they're expanding their home, maybe the tree was dead, storm damage, all sorts of losses are captured there. And going back to the benefits that trees provide, the reason that we care about where trees are and aren't in Somerville and how that's changing, again, is linked to benefits. So, trees provide benefits, and we can put a value or a dollar amount to those benefits based on the costs that we avoid paying because trees exist. So for example, we don't have to pay for air filters to remove pollutants and particulates if trees are out there capturing those and removing those from the air. And the value of that service is $85,000. Trees in Somerville also sequester carbon, which helps offset carbon emissions from vehicles, buildings, and other fossil fuels, and that's worth $1.7 million per year in services. Then I mentioned trees are really important for absorbing, filtering, and slowing stormwater during storm events, and the value of that service is worth about $19 million in avoided costs of stormwater treatment and other things. So this 11% loss in tree canopy cover over a 5-year period equates to a loss of about $4 million in ecosystem services each year just through tree loss. Another way to think of it is that residents in Somerville are now paying about $4 million more in services across town to make up for the trees that were lost during this period. So that's a snapshot of tree canopy cover. I'll just mention that the plan went into a lot more detail about where trees are and aren't across, street rights of way and parks and open space. So next week, we'll make the full plan available to you where you can see more information about how tree cover varies across town. The next part of Somerville that we evaluated was your urban forestry program within town government and how that's structured and managed. So one of the first things that we do when we look at a town's program is we measure the town against 32 indicators of a sustainable urban forest. And this is an assessment tool for urban forestry to help you just evaluate the different aspects of a program and the level of performance of the town's program against these different indicators. So there were 8 indicators that relate to the trees themselves. That's their condition, the species diversity, how evenly spread tree cover is across town. An additional 10 indicators relate to the community and stakeholders. So, how are different sectors of town, like businesses and the healthcare sector, how are they engaged and talking and active in tree planting and preservation? And then the last 12 indicators relate to the management program itself. So, how are plans and decisions made? What types of data are available? What's the management program look like, et cetera? And here you can see how Somerville measured on these different indicators in general. So amongst the 8 tree indicators, the average level of performance was low, mostly because we don't have detailed information about Somerville's trees, because we don't yet have a tree inventory. There is quite a bit of, the populace of Somerville is pretty well educated about trees. And so you saw the level of performance be low to moderate for the community and stakeholders. There's still some cross-sector coordination that could happen to raise the level of performance in town. And then the management program, as we'll get into, also ranked low to moderate based on the different indicators. The full assessment is available in the plan. I'm belaboring it a little bit in this presentation because a lot of the recommendations that you'll see kind of come from this tool of assessing the urban forestry program. So the outcomes of this assessment informed a lot of our recommendations. This is just a breakdown of the trees category of this indicators assessment and kind of the different individual assessments that were conducted as part of this, overall performance level rating of low for the town. You can see that the town has pretty good protections on private land, which led to it being rated moderate for trees on private property, and then low in other areas because your canopy cover is shrinking. There's a lot of variability from 0 to 93% cover, depending on what part of town you're in. And then just a lack of information about some specific tree inventory information. So that's how that breaks down, and the full assessment is in the plan. Early on in the process, the town identified a goal for this planning process, which is that they would eventually like to shift toward more proactive management of public trees in Somerville. And what that means is proactive management includes the regular inspection of trees and maintenance. They have a goal of getting on a 10-year pruning cycle, which means that 10% of trees would be pruned each year. And then when you get to the end of that 10 years, you would repeat the pruning again and prune trees on a 10-year cycle. And then any additional maintenance that would occur would be based on what's known about the urban forest and based on risk assessment and prioritizing trees based on risk. So overall, proactive management would shift the town toward fewer emergency calls over time and more cost savings because you're planning work out a little bit better. Versus reactive management, which is kind of how the town manages their urban forest now. It's common to see this amongst communities of any size, where inspection and maintenance is more driven by resident requests or emergencies and doesn't occur on a regular cycle. So some of the benefits of proactive management, and the reason that this is a goal, is that over time, this improves public safety because you're not getting as many emergencies. For example, you recognize that a branch might be prone to dropping during a storm, so you're going to prune that in advance so that when you get to the storm, you don't have as much cleanup to do. Proactive management reduces per tree maintenance costs, reduces the need for future tree care, improves customer service, because if you think about how stressful an emergency request is, if you're having that less, then that improves customer satisfaction. And overall, it just creates a more sustainable and equitable urban forest over time. So that is a goal of Somerville's program. Now, when we look at the program in town and compare that to other cities and towns for which we have data across the US, we noted that per person or per capita, the average spending for urban forestry is about half of what other municipalities are doing across the country. So Somerville is spending about $4.16 per person each year on trees, and that includes staffing, contractual work, planting, and maintenance. And when we compare that to all cities and towns, and also towns that are about similarly sized to Somerville in terms of population, spending is about 1/2 of what other towns are doing across the country. And a lot of this is because the town has relatively few staff members that are dedicated to trees. This is the full-time equivalents, or FTEs. It measures the amount of time that staff members devote to urban forestry. So we have about 2.3 full-time equivalents in Somerville dedicated to trees, compared to towns in the city in the south, or towns and cities in the south, and towns of a similar size to Somerville. They have between 6 to 8 full-time equivalents or staff positions dedicated to trees. And what we note is just that the 2.3 positions that are dedicated to trees in Somerville are already working very, very hard to provide the level of service that they provide. If we talk about moving to a 10-year pruning cycle, or greater levels of service, the 2.3 staff members that are there currently are already maxed out. So it would require adding some additional staff to town to be able to move to that proactive urban forestry goal. All right, for the next part, I'll talk about a little bit about the public engagement, and then we'll go into the recommendations of the plan. So we gave you a survey in January. Thank you if you filled out the survey. There are about 20 questions on the survey about how you feel about Somerville's trees. These are some important findings that kind of capture the findings in general from the survey. The full survey findings are in an appendix in the plan, so you can read through the responses to each question. But residents strongly agreed that trees are an important part of Somerville. They strongly agreed that the town of Somerville should work to preserve trees on public property. And they agree, but there was a little bit more, lack of consensus about how the town should be involved in protection on private property. At the bottom left, we asked a question about whether the town's existing ordinances and guidelines are adequate to replace trees that are cut down on private property or during development. This was one question where we kind of had the most disagreement, and we saw a lot of comments about this. Most folks didn't know if the ordinances and guidelines are adequate. And then about, an additional 40% of respondents disagreed that that was the case. When we asked about funding, people could choose a variety of funding sources, but overall, more than 90% of respondents felt that town government should be paying for trees on public land, supplemented by funding from charities, nonprofits, and residents. We also had stakeholder focus groups. We had 21 participants in focus groups representing 16 entities from government, business, and nonprofits. A lot of these folks don't work in trees on a daily basis, but their work is somehow affected by trees. And so over 4.5 hours of discussion about trees in Somerville, some big areas of agreement that we saw from both the focus groups and also from the survey. Again, trees are an important part of Somerville. Trees attract residents and visitors to the town. And folks see that the town is different today in the past. Things are changing both in the natural landscape and also the developed landscape. The public right-of-way, which is where a lot of planting requirements related to development occur, the public right-of-way is getting crowded. So it's getting harder to do those required plantings, and trees are interacting with signage and utilities. Also, the town it needs to balance some way tree protection and town growth. People agree that that's the case, but there's disagreement about how that balance should occur. So points of disagreement or discussion or divergence. Some folks feel that the town needs stricter protections for trees and better enforcement of policies related to tree protection, whereas other folks think that the town needs more flexibility to facilitate growth and economic development. So how to strike a balance, this plan doesn't quite resolve how to strike that balance. It's a point of discussion that is for the future and will require, engagement and change over time. One discussion point was about grand pine trees, specifically grand trees that grow up in a forest and suddenly now exist in the open. Are they structurally sound? How should protection address that? And then the town must restore and protect its natural beauty. Some folks feel that that's the case, and other folks feel that development and change is really important. So these were some of the discussion points that came out of our public engagement that informed the recommendations. So the plan recommends 8 future actions that the town can take to advance its urban forestry program. And each of these 8 recommendations then have action steps underneath them. And again, the point of the recommendations is to help achieve this vision for Somerville's trees, that the town will be distinguished as a place of beauty, health, and vitality based on the care for its trees. So I will walk through each of these 8 recommendations, and then I'm going to try to do this fairly quickly, and we'll move to Q&A. So the first recommendation is about the data that exists for the town related to urban tree canopy, and that those data need to be regularly updated and revisited so that you can measure progress. So this assessment that went into this master plan, we recommend that it continue every 5 to 10 years. And so the next year would be around 2026 that you evaluate how tree cover is changing over time. The second goal is again related to data and information, and that this recommendation is about creating a tree inventory of all public trees. So in trees in your street rights of way and also in your parks and open space. Looking at their condition, their species, the size of those trees. And those data will be really important because they form the foundation for informed decision-making about how to manage your trees going forward. The third recommendation is to grow the town's urban forestry program to match the desired level of service. So there needs to be some agreement and consensus in town about what that desired level of service is. Is it proactive management with the 10-year pruning cycle, or is it some other desired level of service? In general, there's agreement that there needs to be a bit more, but kind of what that looks like, will be a point for future discussion. Growing the urban forestry program, we recommend an action step of formalizing an urban forestry department within town government. So currently your urban forestry staff are located within the planning department and within parks and recreation. But a lot of towns have a separate urban forestry department with its own line item in their budget. And that's a recommendation for Somerville to consider here. As I mentioned, the staff that you currently have are working very hard to provide your current level of service. So any growth to that would really need to happen through the hiring of additional staff. And with that, we also recommended annually reporting on urban forestry activities to provide that accountability and transparency about how additional support for urban forestry is being spent. The fourth recommendation is about developing a management plan. So this master plan provides a 10 to 20 year vision and outlook for urban forestry. A management plan is more for the staff of the town to create detailed work plans and have more detailed information that can help inform their day-to-day operations and decision making. A 10-year pruning cycle would be one of the parts that go into this management plan. And then also preparing for threats and emergencies. And these are some little sub-plans that would be part of a larger management strategy, such as like how do we address environmental threats such as storms? How do we address pests and diseases that are coming into town? How do we quarantine or address affected trees, et cetera? and a storm response plan. The fifth recommendation, it gets to a point that was brought up from stakeholders that trees are a narrow slice of what attracts visitors and residents to the town. Really, all of the parks and green space are such a large part of the town's charm and history. But there needs to be almost bigger thinking about how those parks and green space interact with each other, and trees as a subset of that. So the Parks and Recreation Department is planning to undertake a master plan to provide some of that higher level vision of what parks and green space look like and how it operates in the town of Somerville. And so this data and information about urban forestry could help inform a parks master plan. As part of this, the town might consider acquiring and preserving natural areas as part of its growth and annexation process to help counteract some of the losses that are occurring that would be hard to offset just through planting and maintenance alone. And then a Parks and Rec master plan could help target investment in parks and trails in places where it would have the biggest bang for its buck in terms of resident well-being. The sixth recommendation is about taking the high level of education and support that we see in Somerville, which really sets it apart from a lot of other communities where people don't understand as much the value of trees. We see this high level of support. So how can we leverage that to advance funding and partnerships that can benefit urban forestry? There are a host of action steps under here that involve capitalizing on the depth of experience within the Tree Protection Board to expand their duties beyond permit approval to advocacy and overseeing the urban forestry program within Somerville. It might involve building a coalition, building this cross-sector coordination involving businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, your health sector, concerned citizens and others into a cross-sector coalition that can meet regularly about the Urban Forest Master Plan and oversee its implementation. This is something that we've seen be very helpful for urban forestry in other communities. I was part of a coalition here in Cleveland, Ohio that has done this. We've been going now for 8 years on our master plan, and I found it to be very helpful here. So that was a recommendation that Somerville would consider as well. You could create volunteer programs such as what we see in Ann Arbor with the Citizen Pruner Program that provides young tree training and support. And the last bullet point about regional collaboration, some of that's already occurring because the Parks Department, for example, doesn't have some of the really specialized tree equipment to do tree care, so it borrows it from other municipalities. But because the town boundaries are pretty detailed and change over time, some contractors mention that they don't know on a daily basis, they may go from one municipality to another very quickly. And so some regional collaboration about what your tree protection policies are could help make it easier for implementation. The second to last recommendation is about refining existing tree protection policies for private land and for development. So you just passed a unified development ordinance and have updated that. So some future updates might be looking at different zoning and land uses and customizing some of the protections or mitigation requirements based on different zoning and land uses. For example, maybe having different requirements for planting if it's a private residential property versus a very large development. This might be also an opportunity to look at mitigation fees. So the fees that are assessed for people who remove trees, those fees could be more directly linked to the benefits that trees provide, and the size of the tree, the location and condition. And those mitigation fees that go into the tree fund then could help support planting and maintenance that occur in other areas of town. So that might be something to look at. Utilizing permits for utilities to provide a little bit more close oversight of the trimming and removals that are happening in the right of way. And then the last recommendation is about establishing a program to prioritize tree plantings in areas that advance town sustainability and equity goals. So actions would be continuing and growing the Somerville Roots for Trees program, targeting planting and maintenance activities within high priority areas for other environmental or social benefits, providing additional trees for planting on private property, and reestablishing the tree bank where developers plant trees. Okay, so next steps are that we'll release the plan next week, and you'll have it through July 7th to provide public comment on that plan. And then July 12th is the target date for a town council vote about the urban forest master plan and whether the town chooses to formally adopt that. So now we'll move into Q&A.
All right, thank you, Sandra. And now if anybody watching has any questions or comments, if you could please type those in, and we'll be happy to answer those or respond to those as we can. I'm not seeing any questions. I'll give folks a few more minutes if it's someone's typing something up.
And also, if you don't feel comfortable typing in a question now, you can also email us your questions after the fact.
Yes.
So next week, next Tuesday from 3 to 7, we'll have an in-person public engagement about the tree plan. We'll be open at Doty Recreational Center. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Doty Park, the building there. Yes.
Okay. From 3 to 7, and we'll work through this presentation a few different times for people who are coming and going. So if you would plan to attend both, just be advised that it'll be the same presentation, but if you'd like face-to-face discussion, you're welcome to join.
Right, and I still don't see any questions. So like Sandra said, if you think of any or want to make any comment, but don't want to do it on this, please feel free to email, or you're welcome to come to the in-person meeting next week and have a face-to-face discussion. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll see some more folks next week.
Thank you.